Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 2020 TECaN ONTPD Virtual Private Practice Career Panel. We are your moderators. I'm Pui Lai, and we have Ashley Luck here as well. And just to begin, I want to remind everyone to please mute yourself when you're not speaking, and to also select the speaker view, which you can find at the top upper right corner of your screen, so that you can see who is speaking when they're speaking. So just a little bit about myself. So I am a non-academic neonatologist employed by MEDNAX and based in the level 3 NICU at Good Samaritan Hospital in San Jose. Ashley, if you can introduce yourself.
I am a transitioning neonatologist into a pediatrics group from Washington, D.C. Right now I'm moving to Dell Children's, University of Texas at Austin, and I'm starting there in a couple weeks.
So today we have invited our panelists. And so just to briefly also want to mention that we have only 1 hour together here. So we'll try to get through as many questions and answers as possible. Given the time restraints, not all panelists may be able to answer every single question. And so for valuable questions that require lengthy answers, the panelists have graciously sent in their answers in a written format ahead of time, and we will post that link to you in the chat box below. Also, if you have any questions for any of our panelists throughout the entire session, please feel free to type them in the chat box and we will ask them as we go along.
Pui, I'm just trying to advance the slides. I'm not sure if they're working.
Yeah, they are. I see that. So Dr. McKendrick, you can go ahead and give us a little introduction about yourself.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for inviting me to participate. I think this is a great forum and one that we very much need in the current environment. I have been at North Shore University Health Systems in the northern Chicagoland area for 27 years. I am the head of neonatology and vice chair of pediatrics here. North Shore is a moderate to large size regional healthcare system in the northern Chicagoland area, including 5 hospitals, 1 large level 3 unit, and a few other level 2 nurseries to sort of feed into that. I characterize our practice kind of as a community academic hybrid in that we are academically affiliated with the University of Chicago. We have a pretty active research mission within our department. At the same time, we're not university employees. We are employed by North Shore, which is a private nonprofit healthcare entity. So it's to some extent the best and maybe the worst of both worlds.
Thank you very much. Ashley, could you advance to the next slide? Dr. Hubbard?
Yes, so I'm Dina Hubbard, and I have a unique path, but I started the first 9 years in private practice neonatology in Kansas City, where we had a very busy high-risk OB delivery service and covered a total of 7 hospitals in the Kansas City metro, level 2 and level 3. We at Sunflower Neonatology is a private practice group that was contracted by the hospitals, 4 of which in our largest NICUs were owned by HCA. So I was in private practice for 9 years and loved it and gained a lot of experience and needed something different. And so for the last 2 years, I've been at Children's Mercy back in academics, but the majority of my career is in private practice and community neonatology. And so that's why I'm here today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Dr. Levy?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Philip Levy. I'm actually currently a neonatologist at Boston Children's Hospital, which is very much academic, but I spent 1 year after fellowship at Washington University in St. Louis, and then 4 years in private practice in a practice in New Jersey called Mid-Atlantic Neonatology Associates, which was affiliated with a level 4 children's hospital and affiliated with Thomas Jefferson University. I worked very closely with residents and medical students. We had an active fetal care center, and it was also very much a hybrid academic / community private practice where I was able to continue to do research that was affiliated with my fellowship. And then for family reasons, we ended up moving closer to my wife's family in Boston, where I've been for the last 2 years.
Dr. Loy.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I agree with Bill. I think this is an important forum for us to discuss kind of how neonatology is practiced in a lot of different forums and different formats across the country. I think kind of continuing with the theme here, our practice has been it really is a bit of a hybrid. It started out that way and has become far more academic in the last number of years since Dell Medical School opened. They just graduated their first class. It is embedded within the University of Texas here in Austin. I came here 17 years ago. I was drawn by the children's hospital that was being designed at the time. It was a hospital within a hospital at that time. It's now a freestanding children's hospital that is growing tremendously, particularly in the last number of years. We've always had residents and medical students as part of our practice. We've had a pretty strong, pretty strong quality lane for the duration of my career here. But in the last number of years, with the medical school starting the resources to support academic endeavors that would include other types of scholarly activities have really increased. So thank you so much for having me here and appreciate the opportunity to share.
Last but not least, Dr. Nguyen.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tree Nguyen. I'm a neonatologist. I did my fellowship at Loma Linda. I had a wonderful time there, and I moved up to Northern California and joined the group in Kaiser Permanente in Roseville, California. So we are a level 3 hospital, NICU, sorry. We have 48 beds. Our census is mostly in the high 40s. Sometimes we flex up to the 50s, and we are building up to 60 beds in 2021. It's a private group. There's like 15 of us. We mostly are clinical, but there is a chance to do academic research if you really wanted to. Not really basic science. The big centers around us are UC Davis and UCSF and Stanford. So we can always reach out to them to do it if we wanted to. But we do have a big division of research located in Oakland. Other than that, it's a great group. There's 15 of us. It's a high delivery center. We have almost 7,000 deliveries a year at Roseville, and we both see well newborns and obviously babies in the NICU. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Our first question goes out to all the panelists here, and it is, what made you choose a career in private practice?
We'll start with
I guess I'm first on the rotation. Okay. Well, I guess I didn't start out, planning to go into private practice. Where I trained, I knew I was going to stay in the Chicagoland area, and I had my choice of 3 or 4 different jobs at the time, and they were all academically affiliated in one way or another. I chose the job I chose, I guess, because it was a very financially strong institution, one I felt was going to be around for a long time to come. I didn't have probably the clearest vision of where I wanted to go with my career when I finished fellowship. I was just happy to be done and not taking night call every 4th night. So we can get into that later as far as something to think about for graduates going out as far as setting your goals. But, I sort of took the job that seemed to offer the best, the most stable financial environment, the strongest institution. So that's kind of the extent of it for me.
So for
Dr. Hubbard? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
I knew that I wanted to do clinical neonatology. I didn't have a research interest. And during my fellowship, my father had died and I had a 4-year-old at home. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be a researcher and didn't think I would be known in the neonatology world for academics, and had the opportunity to join a private practice group in Kansas City. That was very unique in terms of they were completely private practice, not affiliated with a children's hospital or a university, but they were very academic in nature. So they were very interested in developing and advancing the program. So starting a transport team, developing a cooling program, very active in Vermont, Oxford. So it was a different view of private practice than what I thought I had in my mind from my academic colleagues. And so work-life balance was really the reason that I chose that. And interestingly, that's at a different phase. 9 years later in my career, work-life balance is why I went back to academics. So interesting that your needs change over time.
Dr. Levy?
Thank you. Just really to echo what the first two panelists mentioned, a lot of it was about flexibility, family, and looking kind of for stability within a hospital system. Specifically for me, I was very much still interested in academics, but for financial reasons, private practice paid more. I was closer to family in New Jersey, and it offered me an opportunity to do research in a non-stressful environment, in so much so that my career path wasn't based on how many grants I obtained at the time, and more for the support that the private practice was able to offer.
Dr. Loy?
I think, kind of continuing with a lot of the previous statements, we were very interested in Austin. We looked at jobs, a number of different sites in Texas. This was one of two non-university based positions that I considered. I chose Austin because it was a nice mix of a number of different factors, one of them being the proximity to family. We had an 18-month-old at the time, and then had 3 boys within like 3 years. So life changed pretty rapidly. It was a good place to raise a family. The division here had medical students and residents. So a lot of the things I enjoyed most about a university-based environment, I was able to continue doing, providing resident education at the bedside and also didactic teaching. There was a lot of opportunity, it seemed to me here, program development. There were a lot of things that were sort of nascent. There was a transport team here, but was very, the physicians ended up going on all the transports. So I ended up doing, one of my first projects was taking over the transport team, for example, and teaching them to intubate and setting up policies and procedures for nurse and respiratory therapy driven transport. The group here was had a very good culture. They seemed to like each other, treated each other well. That was important to me. It was also in a very strong hospital system, so I thought that from a financial perspective, it would be a wise choice. And so all around, it just kind of met a number of the needs that my wife and I were looking for when we came out of training.
Last but not least, Dr. Nguyen.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to echo a lot of what a lot of the other NEOs have said. I didn't leave academic because I didn't like it. Actually, I left because my wife is from Northern California. We have always said that we were going to try to come closer to her family. But I think deep down, I'm really happy that I went to private just because of some of the things that others have said, just the work-life balance that at least our group has provided. It's nice to be able to go to work, give it your all, do the best that you can, and then at the end of the day, you leave and you don't have to worry too much about, have to publish papers or anything like that. So I thought that was really nice. Financially, they pay very competitively. There's a pension. There's a lot of things that coming out as a fellow, you just have so much school debt. So it was really nice to be able to work at a place where that at some point you're going to be able to buy a house and pay off your student debt. And just overall work balance, I think it was just amazing. So, yeah.
Thank you all. Our next question that we'd like you all to answer in the same order is kind of building on this, answers that you've given. And a lot of you have mentioned this new private-demic model that is now becoming in existence. So what do you believe is the greatest advantage of private practice over academics? Another way of asking the same thing is, what are some of the key differences that a new grad should anticipate at a private practice versus what they've experienced training in an academic, if there are any at all?
So I think I would just echo again kind of what's been said. The biggest advantage of sort of that hybrid model is that, I think everyone comes out of fellowship, or almost everyone comes out of fellowship, wanting to do some academic pursuit, some type of research, even if it's just clinical. And that the sort of hybrid model that I think all of us participate in to one degree or another really allows for that. It lets you get that element of job satisfaction that really is so readily offered by research. I always tell our fellows, it's really exciting to take care of a kid with pulmonary hypertension when you're a second-year fellow. It's not so exciting after you've been out for 10 years. But it's always exciting to ask a research question and get the answer you were looking for, or some unexpected answer you didn't. So being able to preserve that research element without the pressure, as others have mentioned, without the pressure of needing to publish or perish is really a key aspect of that sort of hybrid model. And that's the biggest advantage, I think. Some of those models offer financial advantage as well. Some don't. In my experience, I think the models that offer the biggest financial advantage probably don't offer that research opportunity as much. So it's a bit of a balance, but that's really the key for me is that opportunity to continue to engage in academic pursuits that motivate you and keep you interested.
So for me, I would say the big advantage for a purely clinical private practice was just the opportunity to really learn how to take care of patients, because you're taking care of patients all day, every day. Great continuity. I was part of a small group, so between covering on night call and weekend call, you were following the patients. It was easy to stay up on them, whereas now, although I'm at an institution that has that hybrid model, I'm at the level 4 NICU and the fetal health center primarily. So you can go weeks to months without seeing that same team again. So really, that's where I learned to take care of the extremely low birth weight infants. I didn't learn that in fellowship. And even now, being back in an academic institution, it's different than when I was doing it all day, every day. In terms of if you're at a level 3, not a level 4 NICU, you really see the potpourri of neonatology. And so for me, that was really the highlight. It's really just learning good clinical neonatology. Also, there's a little more autonomy in terms of being part of a small group that is contracted by the hospital. Autonomy in some ways, not always in the business aspect, but in terms of making decisions, there were fewer people to run everything by. And when we did make a decision, a business decision for our group, it was all of us were making that decision. We were equal contributors. Everyone worked the same. So that's what I would say about private practice is the advantages.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo kind of the same thoughts. For me, having been in an academic institution, then in private practice, and now back in academics, I would say the two biggest differences, not better or worse, with an overall theme of independence, is that there's a financial difference, and then there's what I would call a mentorship difference. Actually, the taking care of the babies piece seemed relatively similar between the two different types of practices. But from a financial perspective, there was just more openness to discuss it. As Dina spoke about, this is financial decisions that are affecting the practice. You're not necessarily dealing with the larger hospital system as a whole. And then for the mentorship piece, when you come out of fellowship, you're coming out of a scholarship oversight committee with mentors all around you. When you go into private practice, you want to be able to build upon that theme that the fellowship has given you. And I really had to force myself to find mentors that could help me both personally, professionally, financially, clinically, so that when I did make the jump back into academic medicine, I was ready to hit the ground running and didn't need the same level of support when I had left. So again, it's mentorship, financial, and then an overall level of independence that I learned in the private practice world.
What I would say is, there's so much difference between each individual practice that I think that as you go out, you really need to do your homework on the practices that you're looking at. Our group is owned by Mednax. I have a number of leadership positions within the organization that allows me to have some insight into scores of other practices within the Mednax environment. And there is so much difference from practice to practice that I think you really need to do your homework. I think some of the differences that have been highlighted, the difficulty with mentorship, I think that's a very common theme. Most university-based programs have a very clear structure around how you're to grow individuals. I think that growth trajectory and plan for individuals coming out of training varies tremendously from practice to practice. I have been over the division now for going on 5 years, and that was one of the things that I really worked hard to try and change within even our local community. So I would investigate the question of how someone's going to grow you. The notion today that you're going to just show up and see patients and go home, it still exists in pockets, but certainly not like it did 10 and 15 or 20 years ago. The need to do things outside of strictly taking care of patients is going to be a key part of most of the places that you go look from a professional perspective. I would say as far as a career development perspective, it's an essential thing for you to really try and seek out. From the finances, again, I think there's a lot of variability around how transparent individual practices are. I know of practices that are run in a very old school model that would be very top down, where really only the leader or maybe a couple of leaders know the finances of the practice, versus ours, which is really very transparent, where I have quarterly financial meetings with the entire division just talking about the productivity of the practice. We make financial decisions together, but again, I think you really need to do your homework on that when you go out and look. As far as the ability to do research, there certainly is not the pressure in a traditional private practice model to do research. Our world has changed a bit with the growth of Dell Medical School. We all have regular faculty appointments there, and so 17 years into my career, I'm putting my packet together for promotion. So it's like the rules have changed a bit in our environment, and so to have a mentor to help me, or to have someone to help me even this far into my career, to put those pieces together in order to go forward before the University of Texas promotion board is a challenge. And so I've had to search out people to kind of help me with that. The infrastructure of the university is growing. So it is a soil that is both full of opportunity, but then it requires some independence and some proactivity that you wouldn't necessarily have to kind of achieve in most university-based settings.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, it's kind of hard going last. Everyone has great things to say, and I have to come up with something a little different. I think that one of the advantage, and I've been out for almost 4 years, and one of the things that I remember pretty fresh in my mind is coming from an academic center. I feel like there is a hierarchy that you put your dues in, the amount of publications you put in will kind of determine where your home base is, especially if you come from an academic center where there's multiple hospitals and some people get farmed out. And I think there is a sense of pressure coming out of fellowship, if you're going to stay in your academic center, that you have to publish or do something worthy to have the respect and to stay within that institution and not be farmed out to smaller NICUs. And I didn't really get that at all going to a private practice, from the first day hitting the floor. You just feel like you're part of the team. Everyone does the same thing. Whether you've been there for 20 something years or your first day, everyone has the same shift. I work with a group of wonderful clinicians, and I feel like when there is a protocol that gets rolled out, it gets rolled out pretty quickly. There's not a lot of pushback, and things get done pretty quickly. Whereas sometimes in academic center, there's a lot of varying, ideas about how things should be done. So I guess that would be just another thing to add.
The next question is also for all of you panelists. For those fellows who are interested in a career in private practice neonatology, how do they find these job opportunities? Are there particular websites or people they need to talk to? How do you find the jobs that you found, and what should they do?
Well, I think the first question is what's your geographic area of interest, and that's kind of how you have to start. I think in academics you can be a little more national in your search, perhaps, because there's a little more of a defined framework for that sort of thing. I think in private practice you start with the geography and then you sort of go from there. You just start to ask questions. You know, hopefully you've got a few contacts or contacts of contacts in that area that know who to ask. So it's going to vary from region to region, but I think figuring out the geography piece first is probably important. I think it would be really daunting just to say, oh, I want to go into private practice and then to look, you know, all over the East Coast or what have you. I think that's really difficult. I think getting the geographic focus first and then making some contacts second is probably key. And for most people, you know, their fellowship director is going to have some knowledge or some contact in any given area to sort of steer them toward the right path. But I think geography is where you have to start.
I agree. Talk with fellows that have graduated before you. Oftentimes it does come down to who you know and who you've talked to that introduces you to someone, but it does have to start with geography. I think the other thing that I would add, that it took me a long time to figure this out, that while this is really important as your first real job, you know, well into your 30s, this is not your only job. And so I think something I would tell my younger self is that you don't have to get it right the first time, and you may change what you're looking for. And so while you want to do your very best, don't think that this is it forever. Non-physicians change jobs all the time. We don't do that so much, and there's good reasons why. But do take off a little bit of pressure that way, knowing that you can always make a change.
Yeah, I would say when I was looking for my private practice job 1 year out of fellowship, there were 3 avenues that I went down. The first is I spoke to my then fellowship director and my division chief and identified the geography and wanted to see if they had any connections where they can make an initial contact for me. That was number 1. Number 2 is I know that I think the ONTPD website has significant postings on it, and I was encouraged to peruse that. And then the third was I did some just cold emailing. I found some division chairs or practice chairs and just kind of cold emailed them, really just telling them who I am, where I trained, what my interests were, and then essentially, you know, what I could bring to their division just besides tubing and lining a baby. You know, everybody can do that when they come out of fellowship, but the question is, what are you worth? What do you add? What special features do you bring to them? So again, it was really just speaking to my mentors. It was looking at these websites and then doing some cold emailing, but that forced me to put together my package to present myself.
Yeah, I think what Dr. McKenzie and Dr. Levy said, really, I mean, all the previous comments have been great. But for me, there were certain geographic considerations that were just important for our job search. You know, for me, there are also family considerations with respect to what my wife wanted to do. And so you begin to kind of narrow in on places that are going to meet your family needs. I think that just points to an important concept, and that is that your career needs to fit in your life and not necessarily just be your life. You know, through training, you've got these blocks of time that you're sort of set to go to medical school and residency and fellowship, and they're all very predetermined and constrained. This is your career and your life, and so choose a place that's going to fit your personal needs, your family needs, but then start looking for the other things that you need to develop professionally. And for me, it was a residency program, a children's hospital, and then the opportunity to grow programs or participate in kind of other academic pursuits. And as we kind of considered all the various options, Austin just worked out really well for us. There were rumblings of a medical school back then, but certainly no promise. It took, 14 years into my career before we actually saw that vision realized. A lot of the programs that I was hoping to be part of building, again, took years to come to fruition, but it allowed me the time to grow in other areas and to participate in other committee work and other sorts of administrative things that has allowed me to sit in the seat now, the seat that I sit in now. I think that what Dr. Levy said about cold calling people, looking at where you're interested in going is really important. The last number of people that we've brought in, they've contacted me through interest in Dell Medical School, Dell Children's Hospital, and kind of living in Austin. And then you hear from them what they're going to bring to the table. What are they going to offer to make our division better? What are you going to offer to make that individual private practice better? I think is an important way for you to conceptualize this next step. And then also just to echo the idea, this isn't forever. Please don't stress too much about it. It feels like it's this very daunting task to have to try and choose this job, and it is a big deal. But it's not something that you can't back out of or change in a year, 2 years, or even more if it's not the right fit for you.
Dr. Nguyen, do you have any other tips to add about how you went about finding your position that you got? Any other resources?
Or how one could find a job in Kaiser? How does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I agree with what everyone has said. It's totally true. For me, it was different. I think that the only different thing that I can say is that you know, neonatology is such a small world. Definitely don't burn your bridge. And the way that I got my job is I wasn't even looking for a job. I thought that I was going to move maybe after a couple of years staying at the academic center, build my portfolio, and then go to another academic center. And one of my attendings, one of my former attendings who had worked with me, just reached out and wanted me to come up and work with her. So it's important to build good relationships with people. You don't know where they're going to end up, and you know, and if you have a, you know, if you do a good job and make good friendships, you know, these are very important. So I feel like a lot of jobs sometimes are due to who you know, because once they go on posting, especially at Kaiser, it goes away really quickly. It gets snatched up. So at least for us in our department, it's all about who you know. I feel like that is probably the biggest way for our chief. He comes to us and say, well, if you know these people, who are they, and what do you think about them? So so definitely try not to burn your bridges.
It's very good. Be nice to people.
Kindness matters. All right, thank you. We're going to start some targeted questions now. If one of the panelists that's not specifically given a question, if you have extra tidbits of knowledge to add, I encourage you to type it in the chat box if you have passionate pearls of wisdom to drop. But this first question is going to be for Dr. McKendrick and then Dr. Lloyd. COVID-19 is stressing third-year fellows out right now who are looking for a job. There's a lot of hiring freezes. There's a lot of changes in salary, in whether bonuses are being offered and whatnot. And we hear a lot about it in the academic realm. How is COVID affecting the hiring and recruitment process for jobs in the private practice sector? And are there certain things, such as what I've mentioned, that applicants should think might not be part of this year's typical season?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that's on everybody's mind, and I think the answer to that depends partly on exactly the setting you're in. I'm guessing, and I'll be curious to hear what other people say. So in our setting, I'm employed by a large healthcare corporation, so most of what they do is adult, which has been hit very hard by COVID. Our volumes didn't change. That's not true in all NICUs, but our volumes didn't change. But because the corporation as a whole took a hit, we took a hit. So we took a 10% salary cut. Our hiring is frozen right now. I think that's going to be quite temporary. I think with the new fiscal year, I think that salary cut's going to go away. I think the hiring freeze will probably go away sometime in the next fiscal year as we get our house back in order. But no one has a crystal ball. I think the best prediction I could make for places like ours, at least, is that provided the institution is was on pretty sound financial footing to begin with. I think it's going to be short-lived. I think things will get back to normal within the next, fiscal year. So I think there certainly is hope by the time people that just started a third-year fellowship are graduating. But I think it's going to take a lot of patience and persistence in job search, probably more so than usual, and maybe being willing to compromise a little bit more than you otherwise would in terms of the exact type of position. That's my best guess right now. Again, no one's got the crystal ball, but it's a tough time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really going to depend on the specific context in which you're looking. If you look at the different kind of options for employment within non-university based systems, I mean, you can be employed by a hospital, you can be employed through a physician management group, which is largely what MEDNAX is. You can be employed by large systems of hospitals, or there are a small number of these true, really private practices that are kind of the old school, small business owner led run practices. Now, each of those are going to look different depending on kind of the local environment. And I would say that this is not a question that's limited to just non-university based practices. University-based physicians all across the country have been forced to have hiring freezes and take pay cuts. So this is something that every local environment is having to deal with. Our hospital partners largely, almost exclusively here is Ascension. And Ascension made a national decision to not furlough any of their employees, to not cut their pay. Now, there are a lot of other systems that chose to do something differently. MEDNAX, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the organization, but they have undergone a lot of change as a result of COVID. Not just because of COVID, but there was the sale of their anesthesia division. They're looking to sell their radiology division and really get back to a base of women's and children, which is largely neonatology. And so we specifically were asked to take a pay cut for 1 quarter to participate in kind of the overall corporate challenges. So even here in this one environment, if you're employed by the hospital, they didn't take pay cuts. If you're employed for like us through MEDNAX, we did take a short-term 1 quarter pay cut. We did not have our freezing or our employment hire or our employee or our hiring frozen. So I think you need to ask questions. You need to try and look at the overall stability of the organization that you're joining. And for these publicly traded companies or for other healthcare, larger healthcare systems, you can, with some investigation, understand kind of how solvent each of these organizations, how solvent they are. And so I would do that investigation before you begin looking for a position.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Dr. Hubbard, Dr. Levy, and Dr. Nguyen. For many fellows, this will be their first job of their life, really. And so it will be their first time negotiating their first contract. How did you negotiate your first contract out of fellowship, and what advice do you have for negotiations? And should they hire an attorney to review their contract before signing it?
So I will say that I did not negotiate much on my first contract, but I did have a financial advisor look over it who was very familiar with physician contracts, and they asked a lot of questions and I posed them all and kind of just blamed them, so you could say this is what my attorney or whatever. I know we're not very comfortable negotiating, especially women. And so I just threw them out there, and the answer was no to all of them, but none of those were a deal breaker for me. By the time I did the second job, while still not great at negotiating, you never know until you ask. And so I did negotiate to have my tail coverage paid as a kind of a sign-on bonus. It still had taxes and everything taken out, so I don't know exactly what they called it. But the point is, you don't know until you ask. So you should definitely ask. And most definitely, you should have an attorney who's familiar with physician contracts review it. You want to know what your non-compete clause is, about tail coverage. Again, I never thought I would leave my first practice, so I didn't even pay attention to that. So, and we don't get much training or guidance on this. So definitely you want somebody to look over it, to have your back. And nobody's looking out for you but you. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating.
Great. I'll kind of just echo that. So for me, in all the jobs that I've had, there's about 5 to 7 things that I ask myself. So what's your base salary? Is there a sign-on bonus? Is there a housing stipend? Is there a moving stipend? What's your CME package? What's your benefit package? So how much are they putting into retirement? And then, as Dr. Hubbard mentioned, you want to understand what your non-compete is like and your tail coverage. So again, there are aspects of that that are negotiable, and then there are aspects of that that are not negotiable. For example, in the private practice realm, I was able to negotiate my base salary, but in my 2 academic jobs, the base salary was very much set on years out of fellowship and your rank at a university. I was able to negotiate a housing stipend and a moving stipend in one of my jobs, but the other job, I wasn't moving anywhere, so I couldn't do it. The benefits package are usually non-negotiable, but sometimes they can be based on the private practice. But all told, you need to have those kind of 5 to 7 kind of criteria set for you. And then, as Dr. Hubbard mentioned, I also, at all 3 of my jobs, I brought the packages to a local expert, a lawyer who had worked within the confines of that specific hospital system to make sure that everything looked kosher, for lack of a better word. Oftentimes, they didn't change anything, but for the $500 to $900 for their time, it was worth the peace of mind.
Dr. Nguyen, do you have any comments?
Yeah, so I did like no negotiating at all, and I didn't have a lawyer. Just the way that Kaiser works, their contract is pretty much set. It's almost the same for everybody. They have a whole division that will do research within the area of what the salary is, and they are pretty competitive. Actually, they're very competitive. So when I looked at the contract, I mean, there was no really asking or for any increase or decrease or anything like that. It was pretty encompassing in terms of some of the things that the other doctors have said about, you know, what is your base salary and what is the total compensation, meaning that what's your 401, pension, what is the medical liability, and all that was pretty much covered. And, you know, they give you a house loan so you can buy a house coming out of fellowship. So it was pretty an overwhelming package that I really didn't really, I just signed it. So probably not the best way to go, but at that time, it was the best option I had. Yeah.
Thanks. It's good to get all perspectives. So the next question that we have is going to go to Dr. Hubbard and then Dr. Levy. What are your recommendations to maintain research productivity or scholarly activity while you're in private practice?
It's been mentioned before that you just don't have the infrastructure, especially if you're in an exclusive private practice, not a hybrid. If you're not affiliated with an academic institution, you just don't have those things. Now, often at hospitals, they will have a hospital librarian or things like that, that you can have access to journals and things like that. So what I recommend is really the AAP neonatal section. It is a great way to be involved. And actually, we really need more private practice involvement from physicians. So that's a great way to try to collaborate on different things. I think the COVID registry is a great example of that right now. And there are so many patients that are covered by private practice groups that have historically not been represented in the literature, and it's because there's not the infrastructure. Lots of opportunity for QI and work such as that through Vermont Oxford Network. And I'm sure there's something similar with the data that MEDNEX has. Also think outside the box. What are things that you're passionate about? So advocacy can be scholarly work, and you don't have to have a university affiliation for that. Some of the developmental care things like that are done very well in community NICUs that just aren't represented. So you have to be a creative in making that happen, but find out what you're passionate about, and then just stay linked in with conferences, networking. Again, you don't want to burn bridges ever, but you also want to be actively building bridges because you never know what might change.
And I'll just continue to echo. So the easiest thing to do to stay connected to the research world is a lot of the journals, Journal of Pediatrics, etc., send out a weekly email blast of all of the recent publications and then all of their weekly and monthly journals. And it's a great resource to be able to just look at the titles and peruse the abstracts and then spend more time later. So that keeps you kind of connected. In a private kind of practice setting, kind of two answers. One is when I did look at Mendex and pediatrics, I mean, there were a lot of opportunities to stay involved in research, both on a local, regional, and national level. So those are definitely questions that can be explored for that group. And then for me, when I was leaving fellowship, I was very careful to maintain the relationships that I had established in fellowship and as a first year attending in an academic center that allowed me to continue to kind of bring that research over, not all of it, but continue to do it while I was still in a private practice. And then the last piece of advice is, when you get to your private practice, spend the first 2, 3, 4, 5 months, half a year, really just figuring out what the private practice is all about. What's your contribution to the private practice? How could you bring the skill sets that you've learned in fellowship to the private practice so you guys can work hand in hand? So you're building a work product that works both for you and the private practice going forward.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is directed towards Dr. Nguyen and Dr. Levy. How do you network now that you're in private practice? Dr. Nguyen, do you want to go first?
For us, at least for myself, the way I network is that I keep being active and involved in certain groups, and I reach out to people and make connections. So I'm involved with a lot of QI projects in my NICU, and being part of a QI project, you kind of have to reach out and talk to other people from other institutions to see how they're doing things, just to make sure that you're in line. Also, I work actually closely with UC Davis and some of the doctors there with their pulmonary hypertension. One of the big things that I worked on was how to decrease the kids being transferred out to ECMO centers to UCSF or UC Davis. And so their whole delegation that came to our place and we talked about it, came up with a protocol because most of our babies are sent to UC Davis for ECMO. And it's just an amazing event and opportunity to work with such, it's a high academic center with really good clinicians. And so, once in a while we still share the data to make sure that, what we're doing is correct and to follow up with each other. So I feel like, for me, doing QI projects and doing certain projects, when you reach out to other people, that is probably the best way to do networking.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. I mean, I don't think it matters if you're at a private practice or an academic center. You really want to focus on your impact on the local, the regional, the national, and international levels. And the way that I was able to do it is I built relationships during my fellowship with my research that carried over into my private practice life. So with things like WhatsApp and going to PAS and making effort to go to one conference every other year in Europe, I was able to keep some of those research connections. But when I got to the private practice, we had a big referral center from level 2s and a lot of, RDS and BPD and pulmonary hypertension. And I just kind of took it upon myself to then go out to those level 2s and do some education with them. And that's just another piece. You find something that you know really well from fellowship that you can hone in your private practice that allows you to establish a relationship not only within your own hospital system, but potentially working with your leadership at your private practice. You can then go out and do some very basic teaching sessions at these regional hospitals that builds up your reputation. It keeps you engaged in the research, and then it forces you to then be engaged in all of the interactions in your local community, which will then push you into your regional and at the national level. So again, it's really just staying engaged at all aspects and not just honed in on just your unit at all times.
Thanks. This next question is going to go to Dr. Nguyen, Dr. Hubbard, and Dr. Levy. What do you wish you had known before your first job search?
Somebody else want to go first?
Yep.
I don't really have much to say.
Go ahead, you can go first. Dr. Nguyen, you can go first.
No, I was going to say, does anybody else want to go first? I really don't have much to say.
Oh, sure. Dr. Hubbard?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I'm not a woman of few words usually.
For better, for worse.
Better.
So I wish I would have known that, again, no one is looking out for your best interest but you. And that's okay. And I think for fellows looking that are maybe interested in private practice, it's hard to say that in an academic environment. You're afraid of what they might think, or some old stereotypes of what private practice meant versus academic. You may have a mentor that's been awesome for your research and you don't want to disappoint them. But at the end of the day, what I tell fellows now is, do you think they would give up a different job for you? So again, it's okay to be selfish in that way and do what's best for you. I faced the same struggle when I wanted to leave my group of 9 years that was like family, and they were a great group and I loved them, but I was needing something more. And so that was really a challenge for me. So again, do what's best for you. It may disappoint other people, but you really have to look out for yourself.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. You know, you're on call every fourth night with all of these attendings as a fellow, and it's very rare that you get a sense for how much they make, or what their bonus structure is like, or any of the other comments that I mentioned before, what their base salary is, et cetera, et cetera. I think, and I strive to do this now in my own practice, is when you become a second year, it kind of falls upon you to find maybe a junior faculty or even a senior faculty member and sit down and get right down to the basics to understand all of the different pieces that are going to go into what life looks like when you're out of fellowship. For me, what I wish I known is, I wish I had an understanding of how much a neonatologist made in a private practice and how much they made in an academics. I wish I understood the bonus structure and the sign-on structure. I wish I understood better what it takes to advance both in the private practice world and in the academic world. And I didn't figure that out until I was probably 3-4 years into being a staff neonatologist at whichever job I was at. So what I try and encourage fellows and trainees is, when you enter into your second year, and I do it on my own when I'm on call with them, I sit down and I really just go through the nuts and bolts and tell them what I made at my first job and my second job. And sometimes I even tell them what I currently make, just to give them an insight into how they can utilize the knowledge, the pitfalls, and all of the good things that have come from my own career to help them get to the next stage of their careers. Because that's the goal. The goal is to help you guys do better. And hopefully one day you're making 10 times as much money as I am. So that's the ultimate goal.
All right, the next question is for Dr. McKendrick and Dr. Lloyd. What is the biggest mistake currently made by early career neonatologists?
I'll start with that, I guess. I would say it's not having a clear vision for where you want to be in 10 years. I think, we're very programmed as physicians. We're programmed through medical school. Residency fellowship is a program. Once you finish fellowship, it's not programmed anymore. And some people, I think, don't always quite realize that. And you really have to think for yourself, kind of to echo some of what's been said. You need to look out for yourself. You need to think about where you want to be in 10 years. And that's going to help shape your job search and the type of practice you join. So that's really the number one thing I would say that's most important.
Yeah, I would agree with Bill. I think you have to understand what motivates you, what you're passionate about, because at the end of the day, that's going to be something you stick with. You're going to stay with that. Be proactive. Ask to go sit in meetings, ask to try and work on projects, ask to participate in a policy development, ask to do some of the background research that would lead into a policy change. I put in the little comments that I wrote there There's a Patrick Lencioni book that I like really well because it's very portable. He says, when you walk in to be on a good team, you need to be humble, you need to be hungry, and you need to be smart. And by smart, he actually may have left that off now that I'm thinking about it. I wrote it right before this thing. But they're basically that you walk into a place and be humble. So learn what's going on there. I think Dr. Levy mentioned it. Kind of figure out what's going on, understand your local culture, figure out how your unique training and skill set would fold itself into what they're doing there. But be hungry. I mean, have an idea where you want to go with your career. Have an idea about the things that you're passionate about and how they'll fit into developing better patient care for your local environment. And then to be smart. I mean, and what they're talking about there is really an emotional IQ, kind of, which ties back into the humility. I mean, step into your group, don't act obviously like you know everything. Try not to say back in wherever, this is how we did it, but learn, try and appreciate what they're doing there, understand the dynamics around you, and then have a vision for how you can participate in that local environment, providing better patient care in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years than they do today.
Thank you. This
Hey,
was
thank you. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay, well, we only have about 5 minutes left. And so I'll open this last question for any of you to answer, whoever has their best advice ready first. What final tips of knowledge, advice would you offer to these third-year fellows who are applying right now? Maybe one of the questions we've asked hasn't allowed you the space to give a certain pearl or tip. And so it's open mic, whatever you think are your last words of imparting wisdom.
I'll just throw in something that I think I mentioned in the answer to one of the questions, and that is think about fit. That is the key thing. How will you fit with the group? And that's something that, the guy interviewing you is going to be thinking about too. How are you going to fit in with this group? One of the best pieces of advice I got when I was a fellow looking at jobs is that an attending told me, it's like getting married. It really is like entering into a marriage. And you have to think about how that relationship is going to play out, not next year or the year after, but potentially for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. As has been mentioned, it's not the last job you'll ever have, very possibly, but it's what you're going to be doing for at least a few years. So really think about the fit. That's key.
I would encourage them to relax and enjoy this season. You've got opportunities that are in front of you that are really going to be wonderful. There are a lot of great places to go practice, a lot of great context that you could insert yourself within. So enjoy it and recognize that, you'll put in a lot of great effort to try and make your very best choice, but you also do have some flexibility to change if it's not right.
Yeah, I would add, this is just an opportunity to go out and sell yourself, to really make those connections at a multitude of places. There's few opportunities in life when you get to show who you are out in the world. And I think it's been mentioned, but really trying to understand where you're going to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Even if that's not where you're going to end up being, it gives you really just a clear pathway and kind of a diagram of how to sell yourself out in the real world.
I would say find a mentor. It is a little bit harder to find, I think, in private practice at times, but whether that's somebody in your practice or within TECaN or MidCan or WeCan, the AAP section, your organization, find a mentor. And I think having a plan, as has been said, everything is the next step. You're looking forward to the next thing. And then you get out as an attending and you have your life to work. And so you can, after you find out where the bathroom is and how to take care of extremely low birth weight babies, then it's like, okay, what's next? So I think it's good to have a plan and then some accountability with your leader, some kind of faculty development process, even if you're in private practice, so that you keep in mind your why and what you're looking for, what your goals are. And then really that being a neonatologist is not your only purpose on this earth. You are going to do great things, but if, pay attention to other people in other parts of your life that are really important and develop those relationships.
All right, well, thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your insights, and we would like to thank the audience for your participation today. Just to remind you that today's session, as well as future sessions, are recorded, and you can find that on MedEd on the Go. Upcoming sessions include the one on August 19th, Academic Practice Career Panel, featuring Dr. Pursley, Dr. Warner, Dr. Hamvis, and Dr. Poindexter. And on August 24th, there's a session for junior faculty panels, and that will feature Dr. Day Richardson, Dr. Montoya Williams, Dr. Gordon, Dr. Cardona, and Dr. Winter. So thank you so much for your participation today. We really appreciate it. It was a great session, and I learned a lot, and I hope you learned a lot too. And thank you to those who organized this whole session. You can see their names here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. If you have any feedback or tips for future sessions, we hope to possibly do more of these in the future. So you can email us at neotecan@gmail.com. And then a big thank you to the panelists, which shared their emails on the introductory slides if you all have any further follow-up questions with them. There's also a link to a Google Doc for the document where they type some of their additional answers to questions that we didn't cover today in the session. So thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you, Pui, for being an awesome co-moderator.
You too. Thank you, Ashley.
All right, everybody, stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.